Hi, everybody. Welcome to the second installment of Realeyes The World Podcast. Um, Today, we're going to be discussing enlightenment. Um, After going over our podcast last week, I don't think I gave you guys a clear definition of what exactly enlightenment is, although I probably won't be able to. However, I can help point to it. Um, So, first off, I'd like to start off with the different words for enlightenment. Um, Depending on what can we call it? What form of spirituality you follow. You may know enlightenment as, for example, awakening or self-realization. Um, I got a list here, and I wasn't able to completely write down the different ones that I wanted, so to say, and that I tried to get into the religious descriptions. So I'll go over what I got, and then we'll go from there. Okay. So well, let's first start with the definition. Okay. From I believe I might have got this from Wikipedia. And this says that enlightenment is, in the Western connotation, is the sudden insight into a transcendental truth or reality. Okay? And so some of the synonyms we have here are awakening, liberation, consciousness, self-realization, nirvana, awareness. And so here in Zen, let's see, in Zen I have here Kensho or Satori. In Hinduism, I know this one's for sure Moksha. In Islam, I believe it looks like it's illumination. And for Christianity, I wasn't able to really determine if it was salvation or revelation. I do believe it's revelation, but I didn't get too deep into it. And so, if anybody knows, feel free to add to your feedback in any of the comments wherever you may find this podcast posted. Okay. Now, in my search on the internet for enlightenment, there's a time period in history called the Age of Enlightenment. That is not the enlightenment we're speaking of, and in fact, it sounds almost completely opposite. Um, and so, in my research, I found that the Age of Enlightenment was a period in history where rational thought grew over faith. Okay, and if you ask me, it would sound like to me the turning point, or at least uh, an age in history that didn't further contribute to getting rid of this unconscious epidemic. Again, this is something the Buddha saw 2,600 years ago. I don't know the time period of the Age of Enlightenment. However, just based on that description of it, I read you, it seems to be contrary to the enlightenment that we're speaking of. Okay? So let's get to it. So enlightenment. This is what I believe I found. Um, and essentially, I do believe the Buddha defines enlightenment as the cessation of suffering. Okay? And so essentially, if you listen to the first podcast, the the root of unconsciousness, I guess, or not really the root, but part of unconsciousness human unconsciousness, will clarify, is suffering, and that's suffering from desire. Um, so you can break down desire into several other, I think, parts that make it up. So I don't recall where I saw this. Might even be from the Buddha, but there's things like attachment, um, greed, a couple, few characteristics that fall under desire. Essentially, it's anything that you want. And just to clarify, it's not something you want for personal gain. It could even be in your everyday interactions. For example, you want to wake up at 8 o'clock and you missed your alarm. Forget the missing your alarm part. You want to wake up at 8, that's a desire. Yes, you may have a reason to wake up at 8 o'clock, perhaps to go to work or take your child to school, whatever it is. But if you label it that I want to wake up at 8, and it could be contrary to your usual routine, now you are inflicting a desire on yourself. And so I know that sounds funny, but I'm sorry, I'm taking a minute here to regather my thought. But again, the desire is something you're wanting. It's not something that's it's not genuine, so to say. So, for example, me, I wake up when I wake up. Unfortunately, that's about, or it's not even unfortunate. For me, it works out fine. But that's about 4 or 5 a.m. every day. No alarm. My body's just ready to rock and roll. So let's use a better example. Um, so say when you were a child, you're being told you need to go to college so you can get a degree and get a career. Okay. And so without you fully understanding that, now you're going to, and maybe somebody would understand, or maybe somebody has that type of clarity in their life at an early age. But just take an unconscious person, for example, not fully understanding. They go to school, and all they know is they want to get into the best college. And so this could be something low level, a low level desire where they they might not have their passion fully worked out, and I do believe a lot of us don't at that age. But they want to go to college because that's what they think they need to do. Okay, and so they pick a degree that sounds interesting, and so now they're out there chasing the college applications and different and some people have their goal set on one college. You have a desire to go to Harvard. That in itself creates suffering. A desire to just go to college is suffering. Um, I'm trying to build a case here where and it's hard to see without all of the pieces that add to this. But we don't need college. It's not something we live or die over, right? The fact that we want to go to college is that we're playing into something that we as the human race created as part of this physical world, um, and the whole financial system. I'll just add that we've created to exchange for goods. And so we think we need to play into the system, but we don't. And so without us fully understanding at that age why we might want to actually go to college, and you could, again, like I said, if you find your passion that early, you get right into that career field, everything's aligning for you, great. Um, but you could have desires elsewhere. So yeah. Anyways, let's move on from that one. Uh, and I'm actually there. We go. I've got a distraction on my screen. I just need to completely close out. It's not working out for me. Um, but yeah, desires. They could be addictions. Um, could be sex. That's an interesting one. Um, but getting back to enlightenment, the cessation of desiring. Um, I guess in my mind, I would say that's being able to move forward without getting clung up on results and how you get there. Because there's a middle way. Um, and it's funny, I'm going here now, but in Zen they call it Wu Wei, the middle way, and I think the Buddha just calls it the middle way. But there's a middle way to manifesting not necessarily things you want, but things that align with you, with your inner being, without getting attached to outcomes or the difficulty getting there. Okay, so with enlightenment, you're able to realize that. And this is it's a mindfulness and it's an awareness um, of your thinking patterns, essentially. Okay, so let me just go ahead and give you my examples of what I guess I became enlightened to. But I don't think there's a when I speak of enlightenment, it's not a becoming enlightened to a single subject or specific thing. You know, it's becoming enlightened to consciousness, to overall, and how you as a human being work. Okay, so for me, before I found this enlightenment, um, I was suffering from anxiety of the future. Um, I would essentially day in, day out, working for money for no reason. No, I'll say no real reason, as in an end point. And after a few years of that, it took its toll to where I started questioning where is this taking me? What is this amounting to? What's gonna happen next? And at the same time, um, I'm so mentally defeated. Uh, there's a lot of things I want to do in life. I wanted to do in life, I'll say, past tense. Because I realized those are desires. For example, I wanted a Porsche, and I realized the happiness from that, once I get it, will eventually fade. Materialistic things. And so that That's not necessarily something I wanted to do and I couldn't do. That would have been a tough decision, living off ramen type decision. But if I truly wanted it, I would have ate that. Me and my family would have ate the ramen. But I made a sacrifice there. And then what else? For a while, um, I stopped racing. So I like to do motorsport called autocross. Um, Cheap, 1 day thing, not even an entire day, and I just couldn't get myself out the house. Again, I was mentally defeated. And there's a bunch of other things I used to dream of. Exited my mind long ago, and I just there. And maybe some of you can relate when I say if there, you might not even be working towards a dream, but it might just be a necessity you need to do around the house, clean the kitchen, but you just can't seem to find that will, willpower to get off your butt and do it. And it could even be that maybe you like to play video games, and so video games are consuming your life, and everything else is falling off by the wayside while you play video games. Enlightenment opens your eyes to this big picture I'm describing, that, you know, whatever you're trying to get to, or whatever you feel like you need to get to, I don't, it's hard not to use the word want, but I'm just going to have to start throwing it around loosely so I don't get tripped up here when I state it. But it's what you want to do, what you really want to do with yourself, and in life, um, and making it happen, manifesting it. For the longest time, while I was lost in all the illusions of the world, the physical world, I was thinking all these people that make a lot of money, there's gotta be something they know. Not everybody just gets lucky. There can't be, I guess, in the scheme of things, mathematically speaking, yes, there probably can be this many rich people in the world. I guess, I don't know. Because then you think about the top 1%. They have all the money, and I don't know all the details of this top 1%, but they have all this money, and the rest of us don't. And so, one of the things I was tripped up on and just working as an employee is like, I'm not gonna get here, or I'm not gonna get there doing this. There's gotta be something I'm missing. And essentially, it's just being able to get over your mental obstacles. So enlightenment for me, I was able to observe all the things that I would dwell on, even the past. I would dwell on the past, and not just anxiety of the future, um, but all of that. I was able to observe that it doesn't necessarily matter, and that what really does matter, and in a weird way to say, is right now, this moment. This is the moment that matters. And so enlightenment brings you to be present. Um, there, there's various texts, books on this subject. I think Ramdas had wrote a book, Be Here Now. Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now. I know there's a couple other I've seen. Those are just the immediate ones that come to mind. But being in the moment, every single moment, you don't get attached to your desires of what you're working for in the future or what you failed to achieve in the past. Enlightenment shows you what really matters to your being. And it doesn't come right away. For me, it took me a while to really parse through my desires of, okay, and I'll use the Porsche again. Um, and for clarification, that Porsche, I want that as a race car and not necessarily as a social status. Okay? So, at the end of the day, it's still a materialistic item. But once I get this race car, and it doesn't even have to be the Porsche, it's the happiness is temporary. Whether it only lasts a week, a day, a couple years, eventually I'm gonna replace it. Um, or if I don't replace it, then I'm gonna be attached to it. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword. Um, but there is a middle way to having that Porsche in happiness. But yeah, that it. I realize, if I get this Porsche, then yeah, it's not going to be a permanent happiness. And so I had a couple other desires, and again, they fell off by the wayside. Um, and it really nowadays it really does take me some effort to dig up the past. And that's kind of weird, so to say. And that somebody asked me, "Oh, what'd you do last week?" You give me a couple minutes, I'll dig it up. But last week is last week. I'm right here, right now, and not dealing with, but being present to the situation, our conversation, this podcast. Um, so yeah, enlightenment. And let's start using some of these synonyms I've listed off earlier. So, I going from the definition of it said a sudden insight into transcendental truth or reality. So if you call it awakening, that kind of still fits the bill there, right? So you awaken to the transcendental truth or reality. Liberation. So I had mentioned earlier the cessation of suffering. Enlightenment is that freedom from suffering, or I'm sorry, liberation is that freedom from suffering. Consciousness, and I would rather call it self-consciousness because again, enlightenment's to the being, and not just consciousness in general. But consciousness, you know, is being conscious of the transcendental truth or reality. And so we could just call that the big picture from that context, right? It's being conscious to the big picture. What really matters to you. What really matters at the end of the day. Let's use my example last week with the car accident, and the guy that, you know, might be screaming his head off in the middle of the highway. Um, and that's out of rage, the example I gave. But being unconscious to the big picture, you're going to expend that energy on your desire or the outcome you didn't want and make a big deal out of it instead of keep on moving forward. Right? The next one, self-realization. Realizing the big picture. And so earlier I was using this transcendental truth. And so, words like enlightenment, transcend, which actually transcend, I believe, is might be another synonym for this. But to me, those seem kind of like mystical, wishy-washy language, and it's not. But for people who don't necessarily know what we're talking about here, could it could just turn them right off to the subject, right? Enlightenment. Oh, he's talking religion. Or, um, say you say that to somebody of a different religion from Buddhism. Um, and they're like, oh, enlightenment. Oh, this guy's a Buddhist. I already know what he's all about. And so that leads to assumptions and stereotypes. And that's a whole nother discussion of identity labels and how we classify everything. Okay. Nirvana. So, sudden insight to the transcendental truth with Nirvana. I would say Nirvana is more so not necessarily the happiness. I think joy may be better fitting, but the joy to being open to the truth. Okay. And then lastly, I save awareness. Because from this point forward, I do want to try to refer to enlightenment regularly as self-awareness. And that's just based on my understanding of the subject. And I would say the awareness is to the big picture. Um, and I like to drill that down even more into awareness of yourself and how you interact with the world. Um, Self-awareness as enlightenment is not getting caught up with the words that we exchange every day, not getting caught up with the labels that we give things. It's not getting caught up with how we compare one thing to the next. And it's I'm done giving the what it's not, and I do want to kind of give you what it is with your body, and so I want to phrase that in a form to say that being aware of your five senses, and I might even say six senses, like Buddhism, because Buddhism takes our traditional five from the Western world, hearing, seeing, smelling, tasting, and touching, and they add thinking as the sixth one. And so I definitely do agree with that, because once you're able to see past what we call the ego, or not, I wouldn't say what we call the ego, but what's generally labeled as the ego, once you're able to see past that, you can observe your mind and its conditioned thinking patterns. And let me give you an example here. So, you might not like broccoli from your childhood. And your entire life, all you've known is to automatically respond no when you're offered broccoli. Um, for me, the way that worked is when I became enlightened or self-aware, I found myself responding habitually. And I say habitually because I realized that I was saying things conditionally, or from a conditioned pattern, to automatically respond. And with this awareness, self-awareness, and mindfulness, this enlightenment, I realized that I was like, wait, why? What's wrong with that? Why don't I try the broccoli? And I didn't have an issue with broccoli, but just putting myself in those shoes. Why not? Why not try broccoli? And I would be able to reflect on the past where I was like, oh, yeah, when I was a child, I was forced to eat broccoli, and I was eventually given the freedom to not eat broccoli, and I've taken my entire life since then to reject broccoli. I might like it now. And so, enlightenment and self-awareness bring you to that open-mindedness. Hey, let's try it again. Why not? Um, and since the past 10 months, since I've found this, I've been very open-minded to a lot of things, and I've tried a lot of things I wouldn't have in the past. I'm gonna give an example I might hear about later down the road, but hopefully it makes sense to the person. But when I was unconscious, I did not want to leave the house. I felt like everything had to be calculated. Oh, let's go out to the movies. It's raining. Our chances of crashing's very high at this point. I don't want to go anywhere. That would be my thought pattern. Now I kind of invite going and doing things regardless of the weather. It, I say that because it might get canceled because of the weather, but you know, going to the movies inside. Let's go. There's no calculating and trying to predict the future when you're self-aware. You know, the way we grow up and everything we see and observe and absorb, it conditions us. And those are the thought patterns that you're able to recognize with enlightenment. And of course, I envision a counter argument. Well, some of it's common sense, or maybe somebody might say a lot of it's common sense. Like, you touch fire, you get burned, you know not to do that again. And I agree. And so whether we want to call that common sense or just right thinking, not in the right context of right or wrong, but as a species, self-harm, or not even necessarily self-harm, but harm to your being is not generally a good thing. You burn yourself, you're going to have blisters or worse. And, you're going to have to deal with that down the road. Maybe get infection, da-da-da-da. As I say that, I can feel the anxiety I'm creating out of conversation. And so that alone, I mean, that's you wouldn't do something to harm your being. That's not a good counter argument. Now, I'm willing to hear out different things, but there are certain things that I feel are not necessarily not to say up for discussion, but not worth discussing, because it's yeah. Why, if you cut yourself, why would you do it again? You would try to avoid it or do it less. Maybe it's part of your job that you do something and you learn that it's inefficient for you to suffer from an injury and you don't do it again. Um, those are not the type of things we're saying enlightenment brings you to. Enlightenment brings you to, oh, I need to get out in the garage and change the oil today, but I'm just going to sit on this couch until I find the willpower. And before you know it, it's time to go to bed, right? Um, Enlightenment brings you to that getting out of your body. I mean, if you're sitting on the couch, you're watching TV, you're letting the TV do the thinking for you, and that's why um, a lot of us enjoy television, and that for those of us that can't be present, um, and not even to say at all times, but that can't be present to the moment, we get lost in the television or the media. If you're sitting on your phone looking into Facebook, we get lost to that. It, I mean, one word, media. And so, yeah, it consumes your mind. And not to say without enlightenment you can't get up and do something about it, but with enlightenment, it's not even an option. It's like, all right, I'm about to go out to the garage. As soon as a thought comes to your mind, you act on it. Um, Spontaneity is a pretty big thing in Zen, in that um, I call it a thought, but it's not a thought in that you're like, I want to go out in the garage, but should I do this or that, or what if it's raining, or what if something, forget all the what ifs. You just go and take it, not necessarily step by step, but go with the flow as you go. Um, I don't know if this is really helping you guys, but um, it's a very open perspective in realizing the physical world that mankind has put before us all, and the pressures, and I say pressures, the pressures that aren't necessarily real. Okay, I gotta get a job, I gotta go to school, I gotta get married, I have to have a boyfriend, I have to have a girlfriend. Whatever your case is, we don't have to any of that. And I hope people can awaken to that, because a lot of us try to fit the cookie cutter. And yeah, maybe it's got a form of recipe for success, depending on your definition of that. But it's human beings are people. I don't know. Human beings are animals that are problem solvers. Okay? At some point, someone, somewhere, or some group of people thought that we need, and perhaps it is needed, but they thought that we need to take out the thinking for everybody else and just have them do all this, and perhaps they'll get with the program down the road. I don't know. I don't know the origins of this system. Um, I mean, yes, it makes sense, but let's be real. There's a meme that circulates the internet that says, at least for United States schools, public schools, because I don't know what the private schools are doing, but they don't teach us how to do taxes and some of these adult responsibilities that we all have to go through. Instead, we're learning geometry, and none of us are going into the math field. And we're learning history, and none of us are becoming historian. Not none of us, but majority of us. And so, I get it as a general education, but when I look at enlightenment, I look at it as one of the best ways to conserve mental energy. Again, we're not comparing, we're not desiring, we're not judging, we're not wasting energy on mental thoughts that bring us nowhere when you look at the big picture. Um, so, again, I want to try to refer to enlightenment at this point from on as a self-awareness. Um, it's simply it's not simple. um, there's a lot of I want to say there's a lot of moving components to this. Uh, it it Buddhism teaches it to you as kind of a general way, and that if you follow that general way, it shows you the bigger picture, no matter your scenario or situation. And so that's what I hope to also show you guys as we get into more of these topics on enlightenment and self-awareness and mindfulness. Um, with my examples, what I went through, or maybe my hypothetical examples of how maybe some of you guys can relate to it. So we'll stop there for this week, guys. Let me know what you guys think about the second installment here. If you guys have any feedback or have any questions, please let me know. I'd be happy to cover it in another podcast episode or respond to you in writing, direct message, or via comments. So, yep. Thanks, guys, for listening. I'm posting weekly. I'm shooting for every Friday at this point. However, I will be honest. I had to squeeze in this session this evening to make this content. And so I'm trying to get onto a schedule for recording sessions. I want this to be genuine. I don't want it to be prefabricated or scripted. And so I'm trying to fit this in with my family life at this point. I don't really have much other obligations, so to say, and that I just do what I gotta do as I do it. And so here I am recording my podcast per my schedule because I gotta do it. Not as a desire, but as a fulfillment, it feels like to me. Okay? So thanks again, guys, and I hope everybody enjoys their week.